Our recording is in process. I'm Casey. Welcome. Okay. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of our donors who make everything we do here possible. We're grateful to our Stowe Prize donors, especially the Hartford for their extraordinary support, as well as Connecticut Humanities for their support of our research on the Phillips Manuscript. So we have two amazing programs that are coming together here with the Stowe Prize Series. Your support amplifies voices of truth, courage, and conscience, and ensures that the Stowe Center continues to be a vital hub for connection, dialogue, and community change. Thank you all, and I'd like to hand it off to our Director of Collections, Kathleen.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Kat White. I'm the Director of Historic Collections here at the Stowe Center, where we seek to engage with Harriet Beecher Stowe's life and legacy by amplifying and exploring all who advocated hope and freedom in Harriet's time and ours. And so with that, we are here to talk about Dr. Reverend William H. Phillips. And I want to introduce the two folks that are going to be with me tonight. Dr. Camesha Scruggs is Professor of History and Public History at Central Connecticut State University. Dr. Scruggs teaches classes in U.S. history, African American history, public history, and gender and empire. Through oral history and community projects, she works to impart the lessons of history through the lens of regular folks, whose oral storytelling traditions inform and enlighten our understanding of the past. And I'm very pleased to have Dr. Scruggs' insight on our advisory group for this project. And Godfrey Simmons is an award-winning actor, producer, director, and playwright who has spent 30 years amplifying the voices of marginalized people and community. He brings with him an extensive background working with ensembles as an actor, teacher, director, playwright, and producer. Godfrey Simmons is the artistic director of Hartford's HartBeat Ensemble, as well as a visiting lecturer in theater and dance at Trinity College. Thank you, Godfrey, for bringing Dr. Phillips to us in this way. All right, sometimes I have things formally written out, but I think there's just so much to say about Dr. Phillips that we're going to have more of a conversation here. We're going to all be thinking through his life together, but it could be helpful just to talk about how we came across and were introduced to Dr. Phillips. It's one of those moments of serendipity that I feel like can only happen in archives. I was looking for something completely different. John and Isabella Hooker, and Isabella is Harriet Beecher Stowe's half-sister. They were very interested in spiritualism in the 19th century. And they kept a little notebook of all of the people they communicated with beyond the veil through seances and mediumship. I was looking for a particular person that would have been listed in this book. I don't remember who it was at this point. I look in our card catalog, find the box in the folder where I believe their Spirits Friends book is, go down to the archives, and instead of finding a list of names, as I expect I will find, instead I open up the folder, I open up the manuscript and read, "By darkness," and stopped at the first house I could find for a lodging. A young man came out and took my mule to the stable and invited me into the parlor, where were several young ladies who began to make preparations to entertain the stranger. I soon saw they considered me a white man, and this gave me great uneasiness, because I did not know what consequences might follow if I allowed them to go on. At this point, I was a little confused, more than a little confused, because as far as I know, this is written by John and Isabella Hooker, and John Hooker, they are both white. So this wouldn't be a mistake. My mind's racing at this point. Going on, to come right out and tell them that I was a Negro slave, I could not do. And so I talked with my boss and where he had gone, and they soon discovered who and what I was. Of course, my mind is exploding at this point. And so I turned to the front of this document and see that it is the narrative of Reverend Dr. William H. Phillips, a Baptist clergyman of Philadelphia, taken down at Norfolk, Connecticut, before August 2nd, 1897. Dr. Phillips is spending the week there, John Hooker. And then it goes on to this 90-page manuscript. And reading through this manuscript, I knew that this was hugely significant. And I knew it was going to be something to bring in a lot of people on. And so I really want to thank the amazing advisory group that I've been working with on this, including Dr. Camesha Scruggs, Scott Gack, you're here as well. A lot of professors from Trinity College, from UConn, as well as community leaders, high school teachers. I've really been incredibly privileged to be learning from some amazing scholars who have incredible specialty in 19th century in these types of narrative, and insight has just been amazing. So thank you to the advisory group, and a huge recognition that this is very much a group project. There's a lot of people helping out with this, and I'm deeply thankful. So one of the things, I'll go a little bit into what I see as some of the important things of the narrative, but there are so many important things about Dr. Phillips and his life. So Dr. Phillips was born enslaved in 1841 in Virginia, and in 1897, he was a reverend with the Shiloh Baptist Church in Philadelphia when he dictated his life story to John and Isabella Hooker, and they wrote it down. So this is the document that we hold in our archives. Dr. Phillips' narrative runs to about 90 pages, handwritten. Dr. Phillips' story is remarkable in so many ways. In many of the details he recalls of his experiences, the people he interacted with, and the places that he occupied. We know his mother was Fanny Dawdle. He describes his mother as a full African, and that her mother, my great-grandmother, was from Africa. He names the plantations where he was enslaved and describes his attempts at escaping. He discusses his experience during the Civil War, and recalling experiences that add depth and texture to the agency of enslaved people leading up to and during the Civil War. So following the war, he describes attending religious schools and his path to becoming a nationally renowned minister, winding up at the Shiloh Baptist Church in Philadelphia, which is a significant Black church which is still in operation today, as well as having the honor of Doctor of Divinity bestowed upon him. So his life intersected with indigenous communities, with religious thought and practices, issues of colorism, literacy and education, freedom and mobility, family structures, medicine and health, and so much more. It just feels like every theme of U.S. 19th century history intersected with his life and is represented in this narrative. So I think just go into some broad strokes about his life, and then we'll hear from Godfrey and hear from Dr. Phillips. As we say, he was born in 1841 in Virginia. He was born enslaved. He was forced into an apprenticeship as a young child. He learned to read from the Bible, also as a child. He self-liberated twice, or escaped, as some people may be familiar with, but he was captured and re-enslaved both times. He taught himself how to write. He married a woman named Mary Glass, and they had a daughter, Sarah, who was born in 1864. Following the Civil War, he and his family moved to Memphis. He attended school in New Orleans to become a Baptist minister. He helped organize Black churches throughout the South. He was called to a church in San Diego, California. So again, people are seeking him out very shortly after the Civil War, all across the country. And after that, he was called to Philadelphia, and he seems to have spent the rest of his life there in Philadelphia. He was a lifelong advocate of social justice, of racial equity, and that is a trait that he passed on to his daughter, Sarah, who we are also learning about in this work. We still have so many unanswered questions, possibly more questions than actual answers at this time, but the advisory group, everyone that I speak with brings something to this story, and we learn something more all the time. And so thank you for being here with us, for talking through with us, and for engaging with this important history. So, bringing us up to the first part for Godfrey. Dr. Phillips is a young boy at this time. He is enslaved by a Mr. Knox in Virginia.
Mr. Knox had concluded that it was best to put my brother and myself into apprentices to learn a trade, and he invited us into the house and related to us his object to give us a trade, and that each of us might select our trade. I was now about 7 years old. I think I was only 5 when we went to Spotsylvania. That he was fixing to break up, and we had to be disposed of in some way. I think this was preparatory to his going to California. I chose the blacksmith trade and my brother that of a cooper. I was apprenticed to one Michael Ames, blacksmith of Fredericksburg. My brother was apprenticed to one James Scott in Fredericksburg, a cooper. I had as an apprentice to be a helper, or as we then called it, as a striker, striking the iron with a sledgehammer. I was so small that for a year or two I had to build a mound of earth to stand on to use my sledge. I was then about 8 years old. Now begins the hardest and most cruel part of my life. Ames was one of the hardest, most cruel men I ever knew. I remained with him as an apprentice 6 years. My work was not only the work of one apprentice, but I had to blow the bellows and strike for one of the men, but to strike at the forge of one of the apprentice boys. Fall and winter, we had to work all day and evening, often until 10 at night, making horseshoes and nails, picking up scraps and working them up. After finishing up this shop work, I had to go to the house and saw and split wood enough for the cook and the house for the next day. I used to get very tired. I don't think I weighed 50 pounds heavier when I left at the end of the 6 years. We had to get back into the shop at work by daybreak, working 2 hours before breakfast. Mrs. Ames was, if anything, meaner than he was. If she thought I had not got wood enough for the day, she would keep me after breakfast and make me do it. And then I would get to the shop late, and Mr. Ames would flog me for being late. There were several apprentices, all Black. I had a worse time than the others, but it made me very sullen. Ames moved us comfortably, and every Saturday night gave each apprentice a little money. To me, 6 cents. And then some of the other more, some 25 cents. My mother always talked with me when I went to see her about burying these things. But it was my first 5 years that she taught me most to be patient and good. My mother would complain to the Knox estate agent, but it did no good. She sometimes came to the shop and scolded Ames. During the 6 years I was at Ames, I received only my board and clothes and the little money I received Saturday nights and for work holidays. This was all that apprentices received. I now belonged to Mrs. Annabelle Knox, sister of William Knox. Now, I had fallen to her by the will of her brother. He lost his life on the way to California, as I have stated. She was a very devout Christian young woman and gave me a great deal of encouragement. She would send for me to come to her room frequently, would read the Bible to me, gave me a New Testament, and encouraged me to learn to read. Her Christian simpleness did much towards my conversion. Now, she married while I was at Ames and always kept up the practice of reading to her servants from the Bible and Episcopal catechism. A very devout Episcopal.
Wow. And just simply those few moments, we learn so much, right? We learn a lot about the gentleman, about his life, right? We kind of get a little bit of a bit of a foundation, right? Just to kind of introduce us to who he is and kind of his childhood experiences. And so as we continue to go through the rest of these passages, like I asked my students, what did you learn? What did you find out? What was one interesting thing that came out of these passages? But also, what are some of the things that you're seeing, right? We can see some Easter eggs, we can see some themes that we'll start to see. One of the things that I noticed, he talks a little bit about ownership and what that looks like in various phases, right? He says that he was owned by Mr. Knox, but he was under the apprenticeship of Mr. Ames. And what does that tell us about the experience of enslaved people? But also, it challenges the idea that sometimes people often come to this rudimentary idea that enslaved people only did agricultural work, right? And so the fact that he is being apprenticed as a blacksmith and his brother's a cooper, that lets us know that the work of enslaved individuals, it's skilled labor that goes into that, right? And that challenges this idea sometimes that we think about when we talk about and also because I do gender, it made me think about the women that are in this particular passage, right? He talks about Mrs. Ames and the fact that Mrs. Ames is mean, right? I can give a book list at some point later about when we talk about the role of women in these positions. A couple that I'll just throw out really quickly is Catherine Clinton's plantation mistress and also Stephanie Jones, they were her property, which talks about these particular women and the role of women and how they're operating in these environments, how they are having a sense of power and control in these environments and the work environment itself, right? He talks about things that we talk about now, pay discrepancy, for example, right? And also family. We start with him talking about him and his brother, but then once we get towards the end, we talk about his mother and how his mother is going to scold and to advocate, right? We still see that connection family, even though they are within this institution. So I want us to think about just a few of those things as we go through these next couple of sections. So thank you.
Thank you. Sure. Next section. Dr. Phillips is a teenager. He's about 17 or 18. He is enslaved by a family of the name of Yeater in Mississippi. At this point, he had self-liberated again or escaped twice. But again was captured both times. He is in Mississippi now.
This was in 1858. About this time, I was taking the horses to water from the stable to the river. I found a newspaper in the road with a wrapper around it, apparently dropped by someone who had got it at the post office. I got off the horse and picked it up and put it in my pocket. Returning to the stable, I opened it and found it was the New York Weekly Daybook. On opening, the first thing I saw was in large headlines, Negro sufferings in the South. This excited my curiosity at the very highest pitch. I laid it aside till night. I sat up nearly all night and read the paper by a grease lamp in the cabin where I slept. The account it gave of the purpose of good people who were opposed to slavery to in some way put it down interested me exceedingly. This was the first opening in my mind of the possibility of war. Reference was made in it to some English abolitionists, to their sympathy with the slave and their readiness to take a hand in the abolition cause. Statements were made with regard to the industry and good character of the Negroes of the North. Among other things, it said there were red-hot cannonballs ready for those who held slaves and those who upheld the system. From this time, I became a means of communicating to the Negroes of the subject of slavery and the war. I would keep the blacks who could not read posted. I would learn all I could from the newspapers. My interest was so intense that I learned to read very rapidly. And I could get the idea where I could not always understand the words. My intense feeling was like an inspiration to help me understand what I read. I got hold of papers that were thrown aside. I would carry papers from the store home and read it in the night and carry them back the next morning. About this time, I was making plans with a fellow slave to escape. And this is before I got hold of those newspapers. His name was Jim Moody and Grenada, whom I knew. When this prospect of the war dawned on me, I knew what the end would be. I gave up my plan of running. I thought I would bide my time.
Can we turn this into an audiobook? So we see another portion of his life, right? We see him, of course, being aware of what's happening. The Civil War is literally at the eve, but we also see these ideas of liberation that come about, his inspiration that he gets about liberation, right? By reading the New York Weekly, right? And of course, that's in concert, or, similar papers as, as the North Star, like various other abolitionist newspapers. So he's aware, right? So it's letting us know that freedom is definitely something that is more than just an idea. These are people that are putting it into action or thinking about putting it into action. But I also see this as he's building another part of his identity, right? What stuck out to me is that he became a means of communicating, right? We can think of other enslaved individuals and their roles as orators. Frederick Douglass, for example, right? And the fact that he is able to take those words and to be able to communicate those, which brings me to that last section where he's talking about making plans of escape and talking about community, right? Particularly when he's talking about Jim Moody, right? what does that mean? They're thinking about, what does freedom look like in community? What does that mean that others are considering freedom along with me? Right, and I can only imagine that that's the thoughts and the ruminations of other enslaved individuals at this time. And of course, they may even carry that with them post-emancipation, when we start to see these communities of color, these free communities. And I can see like how he's thinking about that, how those seeds are germinating, how his identity is starting to be shaped and formed within this particular section. And he said, I gave up my plan on running. I thought that I would bide my time, the patience, the willingness, and the faith, right? As we see, of course, as he is later in his career as a minister, that faith that is pushing him forward, that's advancing him to these ideas of freedom for himself and for others. Things to think.
And I think we see that carry on really strongly. So for this next section, it's at the end of the Civil War. But during the Civil War, he's married, his daughter is born, and he really has this faith that the evils of slavery are going to be abolished at the end of this war. He talks about having been captured by the Union Army, at which point he would have been able to go free, but he always chose to go back to his family, which is truly remarkable. And so that was his experience during the Civil War, was that he's building this community.
Yeah.
And so we see this as the war closes.
The war closed in spring of 1865. Colonel Frank came and took charge of the fort and established headquarters in the town. The whites were depressed and the Negroes jubilant. They had no further fear of master or anybody else. They regarded a Union officer as the end of all authority. A number of us Negroes got together and arranged to have a big barbecue. We subscribed money among ourselves and bought everything necessary for a good barbecue. I think I put in from $10 to $15. And this was in greenbacks. The Confederate money was over. The barbecue took place in the woods across the Yellow Bushy River. Grass was green, foliage out, and everything was in prime order. The day was bright, and the birds seemed to bathe us in their joy. We invited all the federal officers and all the soldiers who could come. We had plenty for all. I was selected as the orator of the day. Many of the citizens were present. A representative population was out. They felt great curiosity to see what the Negroes would do. After the dinner, I ascended the platform and made my first public speech. The tenor of it was denunciatory of the slaveholders and laudatory of the Federal Army. That the long looked for day had come. My speech came like a thunderbolt from a clear sky upon the whites who had known me and had done business with me. They did not expect such talk from me. But while I had been treated kindly myself, I had seen and known the cruelty of other slaves. And this was what my mind was full of. It was long pent up thought that now found expression.
Okay. I don't even know where to begin. Couple things came out to me. The first word was emancipation. And what did that mean for for individuals that had endured, right, had gone through this institution and they survived. But also another observation was, if not, even if it were a small portion, but economic freedom, right? The fact that in the section where they say they subscribe money amongst themselves and bought everything necessary. The fact that he was able to do that, there's an economic freedom that goes into that, right? Being that a majority of enslaved individuals were doing unpaid labor, right? The value of their labor is pronounced for me. And the description of the event, it's as if things were coming into technicolor of sorts, right? There's this yellow bushy river, there's this romanticized, the grass was green and everything was amazing and joy, right? And what did that look like for him and his community? And once again, we see him, of course, building on another part of his identity where he becomes an orator, right? His first public speech. Now, of course, the section before, he's communicating, but now he's an orator, right? So we see this transformation in this particular section, and that the fact that people did not expect talk from him, right? There's that whole idea of oh, right? They'd be shocked, in awe of it all. And the last section, it was long pent up, and it now found expression. Not only is he narrating his experiences, right? But of course, it's being expressed in the manuscript as well. And what does that mean when we think about the narratives of formerly enslaved individuals and how they are expressing their experiences for broader audiences? I think about that when I think about oral histories, when we tell the stories, right? When we're telling our experiences, our life stories, who's the audience, right? Who's capturing it? And what is the intended outcome? Often we hope that our life stories, whether it's a published autobiography, an audiobook, right? Or a VH1 behind the music situation, we hope that people learn from our lives. And also that sometimes that they may be inspired and encouraged to act upon that. I hope that people's lives are those types of experiences. And I think that we get that from this manuscript, that we see this transformation, we see this transition, but we also see the realm and the possibilities of what happens after. So hopefully everybody will take a chance to look at it and ask the questions. Thank you. You.
So, yes, I know everyone's first question is like, Godfrey, you're gonna read the rest of this, right? Yeah, I think that is gonna be ultimately one of our goals. It'll take, artistic director and, that is coming down the line, hopefully with Godfrey still involved. But, yeah, I think there's so much to think about. Camesha, do you wanna help us think through some of these things? If we want to invite it up for comments, questions.
I think one thing we should think about is who's transcribing, right? We have John and Isabel in there transcribing, and is their voice being diminished? And is the voice of the actual person, is their voice being amplified, right? I think about this manuscript, I think about the narratives of formerly enslaved individuals, but I also fast forward a little bit, I think about the Works Progress Administration, narratives of formerly enslaved people. And to me, it's how loud are their voices being presented in these narratives, and also the work of women, right? what does that mean that she's in the room and she is transcribing as well? Right? Perhaps there may have been questions that she may have pondered that John may not have thought about, right? Or may have guided the conversation in a way that makes us think, or maybe even make the subject, the person that's being interviewed, think about, okay, good question, or maybe I should mention that, or maybe. And so that's why when I'm in my version, I'm like highlighting and writing things and putting things in the margin, right? Like, what are some of the themes that we're thinking about, or like, what are some of the things that come out, right? Family, emancipation, labor, all of those things, and we see all those come out, right? And I think that John and Isabella, one, allowed him to talk, right, and to tell us his experience, and you can kind of see him guiding us through the things that he feels are, and that they notated, like, okay, all right, we do need to talk about that a little bit. I feel like there's an emphasis on they really did listen physically, but also listen in the transcription.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think within the manuscript, there will be a blog post with some more photos coming very soon, so everyone can see this. But yeah, the transcription goes back and forth between John and Isabella. So within the document, within his life, they're both writing, they're switching off back and forth. And I do kind of wonder, like, would he say things to John that maybe he wouldn't say? Well, Isabella was writing it down. Would she have questions exactly what he's saying that John might not? So,
But we also see this division of labor,
yeah,
right, which is, so we're doing this as a partnership, right? And they are collectively taking on the responsibility of ensuring that his words are put out. Well, or at least written out and hopefully printed soon. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely something to think about. What does that mean to have that type of agency, and what does it mean for him to entrust the hookers with his story, with his narrative, right? Yes, he has agency because it's his story, but also what trust is happening that he's entrusting his narrative to the hookers to transcribe and to bring to broader audiences in this case in 2025.
yeah.
Any questions? Anybody have any thoughts?
Yeah, any questions or comments, and if you're online and joining us, feel free to pop them in the chat. And my colleague Anna can help us out with those. But yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I love the agency that he shows in all three, even at 8 years old. And you really see who he's gonna become because of what is shown there. And I think it really counters a lot, especially for older people, what they've been told about slavery. And about, the role the African Americans took versus, the white people who came in from the north and freed the slaves. When he does that barbecue, like, he's organizing that, he's reaching out to other people. And I really picked up on that theme that you pointed out about building community. Like, that's a great example, building community to other people. Because I think you sort of see like there's two worlds, like here's the Black population down south and here's the white population. And he's trying to do something that I wish we were doing today. It's really beautiful to see.
It is.
And here.
I'm a retired history teacher, high school, and I would like to go back and teach U.S. history with resources like this to prod kids into asking critical questions, like you just modeled, who's telling the story and entrusting it to whom and how does it change? And this is just wonderful. So when's it gonna be available?
So again, thank you for your service as a signal. Victory 12 teachers.
Yes.
And we're really fortunate to have on our advisory panel, advisory panel group, a woman who teaches AP history at, oh gosh, is she at Conard? Tara, I'm so sorry. So she is a high school teacher and she is thinking deeply about how to incorporate specifically this document into the curriculum that she works with. So that's something that we find really important.
Hopeful.
On another vein, where this is very exciting and I love the serendipity of finding it, but are there other writings that he has that are somewhere else where are his archives?
Yeah, so we have been able to find a brief biographical sketch that he included in the history of the Shiloh Baptist Church in 1905. But as far as we know at this point, this manuscript has never been published.
Wow.
There was an attempt to publish it through the American Baptist Publication Society. But I don't believe that went forward.
So this is
And
it?
Yeah, and that's one of our questions that we're kind of working with is, why wasn't it published? Like, what is the afterlife? Are there other editions of this, you know? And we don't have those answers yet.
I think it really reflects an incredible amount of hope in almost insurmountable strife and torment, really. And not with hate or any kind of attitude. It's just hope.
Yes, and I will add a caveat, of course, we couldn't include everything, everything in this reading, but he had a very strong personality and he was not afraid to defend himself in any way. Always hopeful, always with this incredible like inner strength. But for example, during his self-liberations, he was armed, and he did shoot someone. He didn't kill them, but he would have. So yeah, there was always this inner strength, inner resilience. But very community focused as well within his own.
Yeah. So like he had built ethics
Yes.
that were strong. Like he had I think just a strong ethical core. He had a moral code that I think that integrity that was pretty unshakable based on the words.
Is there any evidence of what happened to him when he was caught and brought back? Because all I've ever read is that wasn't very pretty.
Yeah, so each time that he was re-enslaved, he was imprisoned. And I believe in both instances, he was sold to another enslaver. And so, yeah.
So weird.
I know.
It's so weird. They run away from the person that owns them, but then they get sold ostensibly by that, but I don't know, like somebody else after being in jail.
Yeah.
And
So
being
they,
facilitated.
right, what is it?
Right, and it's being facilitated
Yeah,
by, by what we call auction house, and think of companies like Armfield, right, like they're facilitators that facilitate these things, but yes.
yeah.
And what does that mean, right? And, of course, at this time, we have the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, where if you sometimes fit the description, right, that may be, you may be purchased or being sold, or some individuals that have never been put into slavery are put in because they fit a description of a fugitive, sadly, right? We think about, like, once again, narratives, right? Like we think about Solomon Northup, who talks about his experiences, right? Of being enslaved, right? Because of this system, this institution that unfortunately people were involved in. Where do we begin?
All right.
So, go ahead. I had a question about the the nature of the work being sort of this unedited manuscript and just how, Kat and, Camesha and Godfrey too, if you've been a part of this conversation, it's like how what the impact is of this being unedited versus other narratives that are, I think in many cases, very edited before publication.
Well, I mean, right, the fact that we have the words here, like, we have like the handwritten, unedited copy, right? Whereas when we think about like others that have been published, right, like when we go into, I think the University of North Carolina has like a whole directory, right? Of enslaved narratives, right? And we see the nice, pretty print version, like who's the publisher and the year it's been published. I think that we can see the process, right, with this particular manuscript. Although there are other versions, right? We think about when people write, right? Like when you write, it's like, okay, what are we seeing? The hesitations, right? Versus the bound and print pretty versions. I think that we can see like some of those hesitations, and we can see like the pauses, even in like the actual physical manuscript version. I think about archives that I've gone into, right? And when we see like people's actual handwriting, right? Like what that means, like even something as simple as like how heavy are they leaning on the paper? Like, what does that tell us, right? Like those are those hidden things that we see versus print is like, okay, it's all the same. Yeah, right. And I think that we can appreciate the fact that we can actually see that in this authentic, unedited, not found and printed manuscript. So I think we can see that. I think that there's a beauty in that.
Yes. When I was reading the written transcript, I found it difficult because it was unedited, it didn't flow. And I was wondering if when you, Godfrey, when you were like reading it and thinking of reading it aloud, excuse me, did you get the feeling that maybe Isabella or John were like asking him questions that made him talk about some particular subject? Or do you think it was just all flowing out of him without any like reaction from them? It's hard to believe that that wouldn't have been more of a bilateral conversation, but maybe that's.
Well, we're reading most of the complete one. It does seem like that there was some prompting. Like a lot of the passages will kind of begin with something that makes it seem like, oh, that was a setup. Like, what happened when the war ended or that kind of a thing. I have no way of knowing though. Like because he wasn't like, I wouldn't presume that necessarily because he was an orator. And I mean, they know how to organize like their speech, and they can do it off the cuff. And he was a preacher too. Yeah. So he don't have no problem.
I know,
Yeah. So I don't know actually.
Just wanted
say
to
that.
Ask him questions.
Yeah.
How were you treated by this blacksmith?
I imagine that there were some gasps or some like, wait, what?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, while someone, just like anybody, if you're talking, but like, I don't know, I feel like you have more information on that.
Or if you're listening, I mean, it's not as if we had, John and Isabel's like questions, question 1, question 2, right? I wish we did.
No.
But I think, I would hope that John and Isabella, right, just as he talked, right, they just let him talk and they just wrote, right? And if he took a pause, right, then it's like, okay, all right. I don't know if it's not as if with oral histories, often we let people talk and then we go back to the tape and then we review and before we edit and before we transcribe. It's like, okay, all right, stop the tape, right, at 2 minutes and 38 seconds. Oh, okay, I noticed this, right? It would be different if they had what we kind of call like margin, like in the margin, like, okay, right? Or, oh, there was a pause here, right? Like if that, I think that could have also helped us understand, like, was it rapid fire questions or did they just let Phillips talk? And he directed and guided how it was going to be transcribed.
And, you know, Scott, if.
Yeah.
you look
So
like
I know,
that,
no, I don't know
You're
something,
also.
but I say, we also don't know if this is a transcription of a transcript, like,
Yeah.
you know, it's really difficult, as you can all imagine, to transcribe, you know, somebody's speech, like, you have to be really fast, like, they're not typing.
Right.
You can type it, but you can't handwrite it out. And
Yeah.
so it does seem like pauses would be a very normal and natural part of that
Yeah.
process, but, you know, this could be a transcription of a transcription.
Yeah. And John and Isabella were both, you know, Isabella used to write out John's legal cases,
Right.
so, I mean, yeah. it's-
Writing and rewriting is a normal
Yeah.
part of their lives, just as an orator, you know, Phillips was, you know, talking all the time, so.
Yeah.
You could see him easily outpace them.
Mhm.
So it's interesting to know what kind of decisions were made in that process.
And even,
And to add to that, how, was there any linguistic translation? In other words, did they take his words from whatever language or slang that he had and translate it into whatever English they wanted to? How much of that was done or how little?
Well, I would hope not. I mean, being that Phillips is an orator, right? And he's, you know, he's able to read, he's able to speak well, right? Especially in that last section where he talks about the first public speech that people heard, right? But also that he was communicating. So I would hope that there would not be this moment where it would be, oh, we're going to write in a language that we think that he's speaking it, right? Once again, speaking very well, speaking eloquence. Clearly, I don't think we would have that moment where we would presume that there's a certain accent or even like small linguistic details. So
Learn how to read from the Bible, but also the newspaper.
Mhm.
So there's like, when he was learning to read, his boasted in reading things that were written for very particular intent, like intentional speaking, right? Like he's telling a story and it's trying to do this, either inform, cajole, I mean, you know, talk about like the whole yellow journalism thing, right? Like they were doing things. And I think, I mean, I don't know, there are things in here that are vernacular, that not vernacular, like they're just, like there are things that are left out that are like, it feels like somebody's speaking, but it's still like, I don't know, I have a doubt that like, this is like how this man would speak.
Yeah, and like writing in dialect, which is something that Harry Beecher Stowe really did, and was very popular at that time. I was actually struck that this does not show much of that. And you've talked about listening through the Works Progress Administration transcripts versus tapes, the actual recording, and there are instances where transcriptors would add dialect in.
Ain't I a woman?
Yeah, it's the truth, right? That's,
Yeah, Percival Everett talked about that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And so like, yeah, it's noticeably absent from this.
But I just
Yeah,
wanted to bring that.
Yeah.
No, you've been raising your hand as well.
I'm trying to think of how best to ask this question, I suppose. I look at this photo and I wonder, are there other photos? Because I'm failing to see how people may not have known he was not Negro. And going back to some of the earlier questions about the manuscript, it's so well written without pause, without, you know, anything, no strike throughs or anything like that. To me, that seems like either back then people really took the time and didn't rush their handwriting, and the loops are really pretty and things like that, that it does stand to reason that one may think in today's time, this is like a very finished, thoughtful product. But in, 200 years ago, writing was so particular then. That
Yeah, and I'll
that
say
would be it.
Isabella has much better penmanship than John. Is it? There are definitely instances, where there are things that have been scribbled out, there's a couple of like asterisks and then written up on the side of the margin, and, I wonder about those times, right? Was there a question that was asking for clarification? Did Dr. Phillips go, that reminds me back here, blah, blah, blah. So we don't know, those are questions. But yeah, there are some points where we're trying to read John's handwriting and go, this guy was racing through, because it is hard. But I want to thank Guillermo Irizarry, who is on our advisory board, for a lot of help transcribing this.
Can you talk about this picture where this was lifted from?
Yeah, so this was in the collection of the New York Public Library. And I think Dr. Dexter Gabriel may have found this one for us in their archive. And I'm not, as far as I know, it's just listed as being from their archives. I don't think that they offer where they got it from. They must. I'm gonna have to look at that. There is a picture included from that Shiloh Baptist Church history.
Right.
It's a little different, but very contemporary to this, so it's a very similar looking picture. So yeah, but he does mention a few times throughout, that he was mistaken for a white person, or that he was lighter skinned.
So on our spirits tours, hello, we're here. On our spirits tours, or previous versions of it, we would talk about Isabella, and we would have her book of where she would do auto writing. And also, I'm gonna plug, definitely come on our spirit tours. It's really cool. We talk about how the 19th century spiritualism in order to create a better world. Awesome cool stuff. But I was just interested. I was like, is there a possibility of considering one of the reasons why Isabella and John Hooker would have been okay with just going freestyle, just letting him speak, because these are folks who would basically they were spiritualists, so we did have this kind of openness to just listening to and I know that Isabella has a book where she would be there's George Washington and all these folks, right? And she'd be they talk to me. So I'm wondering if she, through her spiritualists or through their spiritualist practice, they're more prone to be I'll just listen. And I don't know here, but
I can see that, their active listening skills, right? Just as, all right, we're just gonna listen, right? And kind of muscle memory, okay, we're just gonna write things down. And just as it comes out, right, as it flows. I think that I can see them doing that, right? It's just, okay, we're just right, and then we'll think about all the things later. So there may be a possibility that this may have been all right, this is the first round. Who knows, we may find another copy. But this may be the first edit, all right, as is,
Yeah.
unedited, raw, with, maybe just a little bit of time, like you said, those small asterisks, right in the corner. And once again, being that Phillips is an orator, it's all right, just gonna let him speak. And that's it. And we're just gonna take it as is. I think they captured what he was saying. Of course, once I look at it a little more, there may, like I said, there may be a little bit more emphasis in some places where it's oh, okay, he put emphasis on this, and the ink may be a little bit darker, and that may be those small nods to the emphasis and the tone, right? And of course, we don't have the audio version yet. Of what he said and how he said it, but I can only imagine that he's simply just speaking and they are capturing it as is.
Eric, you guys have this sense.
So I just want to say, so lately I've been doing some research on John Hooker's anti-slavery kind of like work and the things that he did over the course of his life, particularly in Connecticut. But the reason why I'm speaking up right now is because one of the things that I found is that he was actually a court recorder for the state of Connecticut. And so a lot of I think we talked last time when we were in the archive about like maybe it was shorthand first. And so there are some things that I found where there is, I don't know what it says, but there are some like notes of his where he does like shorthand in the court as he's listening to cases take place. So I think that that might be too of like why this is so neat, because the first round was likely shorthand.
Right, like our bullet points.
Yeah, very possibly, yeah. And even then, if that's the case, we still have like some corrections. So it's like, I think it's a process going back and forth. You know, he does say that Phillips was there for a full week. So
How many pages is it again?
90 pages, Danvers.
Right.
So.
I just have a sort of nuts and bolts. What were the hookers doing in Norfolk and why did he come to
Right.
Norfolk? Did you say that? Did I miss that?
Yeah, so they,
Sorry.
What's the connection with Norfolk, Connecticut for both? For all of them?
yeah, so the hookers, one of the kids was in Norfolk, so they would spend some time with the kids, and then I think they ended up having a house down there. One of our big questions that remains is still, how did the hookers connect with Dr. Phillips? And that is one of our big questions. I think it does speak to these sort of activist networks, and certainly people in Connecticut were connected to Philadelphia, right?
Well, also Du Bois up in people up in Massachusetts.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. And so the hookers, they were longtime advocates, abolitionists, women's suffragists, all of these things. And so they were well connected within these circles. But the moment of contact, the point of contact, still figuring it out. Still
There's letters from him, but no letters from him saying we're,
correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out, so I'm Jennifer, I am Baptist and attached to the historical ministry at my church, which is predominantly African American congregation in Milford, not too dissimilar from what, if there was an African American congregation in Norfolk, it might have looked like, just given the demographics of the day. I am next month gonna go into the American Baptist Archives at Central
Nice.
Baptist Church to see if there's some connection, and Kat has been invited to come. So, hopefully, there'll be some further connection that we can make. That'll be exciting. But back then, from a Baptist perspective, just church historically, there would be these like revival meetings and or asks for support of a church, or maybe more so with, Scott, you can help me with African Methodist Episcopal congregations and schools, requests for money for those colleges and universities, also known as historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs in the South. That was still part of fundraising pre and post the war. So there could have been some type of just Baptist need for him to come to and visit, especially since Philadelphia technically, it's a 4-hour drive. I don't know what it would have been by horse and buggy. It would take me 4 hours to get to my aunt and uncle. That could have been part of what was happening. So
Yeah, there were certainly a lot of connections to churches and many organizations. But yeah, I mean, given he was so pronounced, renowned within the Baptist church network, I think that's definitely a trail to follow, to look down. Chris, did you have any questions?
It was similar to the normal questions.
I was wondering, Godfrey, if you'd be willing to talk about this idea of like words. Like I'm having like, I'm feeling so moved by like this idea of like bringing this person's life you know, into the space by being able to like speak it aloud, right? And like thinking about the work that you do in theater, like really allows people to like imagine, you know, an experience, whether it be fiction or nonfiction. And I just would love to hear your thoughts on just the amount, or just like maybe the work that you put into imagining this, or your thoughts about why bringing stories like this to life through like theatrical performance is important.
Good question. So, okay, this is annoying because it's like answering the question with the story, yeah, right? But I'll get to the point. I'll do my best. I teach acting, and one of the things that we do when we're teaching acting is that we're helping people, especially if they're like in college or whatever, to find their voices. Now, there's the literal thing of finding your voice, like the literal thing of, you know, speaking clearly and all that stuff, but I almost don't care about that. What I'm talking about is actually finding their way of telling their story. And part of that, there's an exercise that we do, like a game, it's called a mapping. It's a mapping exercise where they you know, they kind of create the map of the world. They decide what's the center of it. Is it like an ocean? Is it a country or whatever? And they kind of go to the spots where they're from, and then they end up, you know, where they go to spots where they were born, and then where their parents were born, then one of their grandparents, then one of their great grandparents. What we find is after a while, usually these days, within like 1 or 2 generations, like there's hardly anybody in the United States anymore, which is really interesting. But the most importantly, though, is asking them to tell the story of like, okay, so how did they get there? Well, what did they do? How did that happen? And by the end, they started to tell stories about their ancestors and about like their lives. And the idea of what we talk about with young actors is that your ancestors come with you in the room. When you go in the room, they are with you. You could try to outrun it, like that's okay. But like they're there, right? They are with you, they are surrounding you, they are holding you. I don't care where you're from, that ain't just some Black thing. I'm talking about everybody is like they are with you. So in terms of this, like the people that are like, for me, I feel like this guy is with me. Regardless, I played Tom Joad in Grapes of Wrath. He was with me. Now, I have a connection. My dad, at like 5 years old, was a sharecropper with my grandfather in North Carolina, and my grandfather would stay by the road to get picked up to work, just like the Joes did. Like, that's with me. I know that. Like, that's cellular. And at the end of the day, like, so much of it is cellular. When we think about trauma, when we think about these words, when we think about these experiences, some might be closer than others, but I don't know that answers the question about why it's important. But in terms of just what it means, I think that's what it is. And so I don't feel, it helps me to not feel like they're like, you know, sacred words.
Right.
Because I know I can jump in it.
Yeah.
Because that's my birthright.
Mm-hmm.
Misha, I wonder, you do so much oral history, so I'm wondering if you have thoughts around that question too.
Of words, people's words are important, right? They have value. Every experience that's narrated lets us find out more about who a person is and who their experiences, what their experiences are and how those experiences make them who they are, right? And so even with Phillips Manuscript, we learn a lot, right? We learn about his lived experience as an enslaved person. Like I said, the themes that came up, like community, family, network, labor, and economics and emancipation. And as I was interested you say that, because I was, going through this, but also I listened to James the audiobook and was reading it at the same time. And there are a couple of things that stuck out to me that made me really think about this particular narrative. It was, I want to say it's like around part 1, not to give spoilers, to James, but he was talking about the story of Venture Smith, right? And he talks about the fact that it was a self-related story, right? And so to me, it's like if it's self-related, and that means that he wrote it. It was not transcribed by anybody else. It was written by himself, right? And we see that in some of those enslaved narratives, like it's often the statement written by himself, written by herself. There's the agency that goes into that. And so as an oral historian, that's what we think about, like the responsibility of having the agency of someone entrusting us to be their agent, to like give their words out to broader audiences. And I was also thinking about in James, how dare I get teary and emotional, darn historians, right? The interaction between the Georges, right? Old and young George, right? And the acquisition of the pencil. Right. I read book, what about. And the conversation that the three of them had, right? They're like, so Jim, what are you gonna do? Right? And they're like, you have to tell your story. And right. And they tell him to use his ears to tell the story, right? With your eyes. And so I appreciate Godfrey for like giving us the voice, like giving us the ears to listen, right? So we can use our eyes and like have this visual imagination. And we can see, right, that the barbecue, right, that he's organizing, or that he was sullen because of the experiences that he had with the apprentice's wife, right? Or, I can even sense a bit of appreciation, right? When he talked about, even though he now belongs to the Knox's sister, right? That transition of ownership, you can see even in that. And then the beauty of just being able to tell the story, right? Like not having to also do that labor of writing the story as well, right? He's relieved himself of that labor by letting the hookers do the labor of actually writing the words. He just simply has to speak them out, right? And that's a labor and that's a responsibility that we have as oral historians. Like, yes, we can listen, but we also have to like put the words down. And once again, the fact that people trust us to take their words and put them out, that's a privilege that I enjoy, right? Especially, I think back to my childhood experiences of just listening to community elders, like that they entrusted me to be that audience, to capture their words, and I can still like put those words out to broader audiences. I use some of those experiences like in my lectures, even though it's American history. My community elders are part of that American history. It's their lived experience within American history. And so, yeah, I mean, oral histories are, yeah, they can be daunting. They can be challenging. And sometimes you have to take a break because it's a lot of things that you ask of people. But the reward is to have that trust of being that agent, of being that person, of putting people's words out to broader audiences. That's beautiful.
as you were both speaking, I was reminded, it didn't make the sections here, but he talks about the stories that his mom used to tell him as well. About Nat Turner and Andrew, the man who was arrested in Boston under the Fugitive Slave laws of 1850. So again, this idea of stories passing on knowledge as growth to become integral to us.
Whatever.
So, okay, so as a oral historian.
So as I'm reading this, it gives that vibe, right?
Yeah.
Like, although we don't have the question, we have a sense of like, this is obviously a conversation. It is a flow of consciousness, and also, it gives the feeling of there's some back and forth. So in your opinion, because I walked in, walked out, and I caught part of what you were saying. To me, this feels like oral history.
Yeah.
Right? It feels like not just the documenting of someone's story, but the actual like putting in context and understanding of like what you did, what you thought you did, and what was going on around in the world. Does it give you that sense as well?
It does. I mean, he's putting himself into the history, right? Like, it's not just, I mean, like, for example, right, when he talks about, you know, the red hot cannonballs, right? Like we automatically know, okay, that feels Civil Wars to me, right? Or the fact that he's reading, you know, these newspapers, right? It's like, oh, okay, all right, you know, that's the Liberator, that's the North Star, like he's giving you kind of like these roadmaps. And it's like, okay, all right, here we can put it in the history. Because, you know, that's sometimes a challenge that we think about with the oral histories, right? Some people are like, oh, it's just people talking, right? And if you don't have anything to back it up, then, you know, it doesn't mean anything. Yes, it does, right? With US history, it's not, as I tell people, history is not just dates. Sometimes it's just ordinary people doing not so ordinary stuff because it happens to have a date attached to it, right? And people have those experiences, right? Like they are living history. I don't know, how dare I say that? Right? Like they're living the history. And yeah, like we can see that even in this, right? And yes, he gives us dates, 1858 or 18 whatever, right? And we can see, knowing what we know, like knowing the historical record, we can like put him into that. And it's not just this flat, one-dimensional thing, right? Like we now can see it in dimensions through the lens of Phillips's experiences that he transcribed to the Hooker.
Yeah, and I want to say, I did just take a peek at the time where we are. But I think that's actually a really good place to kind of sit with, and a recognition that just as Phillips was part of living history, like we're also part of living history. And I'm very sorry that feels so real right now. This point feels a bit too historical, but yeah, I think that it's important for us all to visualize ourselves as being part of a broad history, and that even our stories are important to tell and write down and share. So.
Yeah, can I just say one more thing?
Yes, please.
This piece, the narrative right there, has been sitting in the archive here for a long time. And so I want to give a quick shout out to the Stowe Center in 2025, where all the structures are in place so that when an archivist with curiosity actually reads a little more of it, it's going to come out and be, right, and be promoted to the public. Somebody else put that in the folder a long, long time ago and did not think much of this narrative. So it's important that it was found now in 2025.
Yeah.
Thank you. Everybody else.
Yeah, to our amazing boards, members who I think we recognize the importance of understanding Stowe as one piece of a much bigger picture, a much bigger history, right? So we're able to still look at Stowe, but also like, what else? What else? Because they were contemporaries as well, right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. I hope that you all will keep in touch. We have a ton of programs coming up, like this week, tomorrow. Please join us if you're able to at EcoSpace 224 for Borders of Belonging. This is a conversation on humanity and human rights with artists, scholars, and activists. That's going to be again at the EcoSpace 224 tomorrow from 6 to 7:30. And then on Friday evening, we're going to have, I know it's a crazy week. Friday evening, we've got our exhibit closing for David Jackson's exhibit over in our visitor center. If you haven't had a chance to stop by and check out the exhibit, please do. It's incredible. David is an amazing artist activist, much as Godfrey, much as Camesha, historian, activist, artist. All right. Thank you for being with us. Keep talking about this and we'll see you next time.
See.